All right, Chief, what can you tell us right now?
Okay. At 4:11 a.m., the Richmond Police Department received a 911 call from Tucker's Pavilion at Chippenham Hospital for a report of shots fired in the location. Officers were in the emergency department. Richmond police officers were in the emergency department, heard the call come out, and immediately responded. When they responded, they were led into Tucker's Pavilion. They saw one adult male suffering from gunshot wounds, which are considered critical but non-life-threatening at this time. And they observed the suspect, who had surrendered, and those police officers took that suspect into custody. He was identified by other patients who were in the ED, or who were in Tucker's Pavilion, saying that was the shooter. A firearm was recovered from the scene. We also learned that a Chesterfield police officer was on scene on an unrelated case in Tucker's, heard the gunfire, and intervened. That officer discharged his firearm. The shooter in this case is a 27-year-old man from Glen Allen, Virginia. He was not struck in the engagement. He was taken into custody, like I said. He will be charged after consultation with the Richmond Commonwealth's Attorney's Office.
What were your officers doing on site?
There was an unrelated report call for an assault that they were taking, and like I said, they heard it come over their radios, and within a couple minutes they were entering Tucker's Pavilion.
In terms of the shooter here, were they actively being treated patient? Have they just walked in to the ER and started? Can you help us figure out where in the hospital this was happening? Was this person the patient, and was the victim who shot a staff or patient?
The victim was a patient unrelated to the incident. The suspect in this case had self-reported to turn himself in for a mental health evaluation at Tucker's Pavilion. And during the course of that, he was entering a room where he was disrobing and getting into a gown, and then, without warning, started firing his weapon.
So you don't know what exactly, if anything, triggered the shooting to take place?
No, we don't know the motive at this point.
Can you just play out again how the Chesterfield officer is involved in this with them discharging their firearm? Just walk me through that.
So as and again, this is obviously early stages of the investigation, but as we understand it at this time, the Chesterfield police officer was sitting on a TDO or ECO at the time, an unrelated patient. He was sitting there with that patient, heard the gunfire, and engaged.
I also saw sheriff's deputies' cars right there. Were they involved in any way, shape, or form in this?
No.
They were just responding to the call?
I believe, as with any hospital, you will see law enforcement from the region here for all kinds of issues, as were we. Richmond Police was here on a completely unrelated call.
Sorry, so the sheriff's office will not be in any way a part of this investigation?
I don't know which sheriff you're talking about.
Or, I'm sorry, Chesterfield.
Well, Chesterfield Police will conduct their own internal investigation, so anything related to that, I would refer you to the Chesterfield Police Department. We're cooperating with the investigation, but the Richmond Police Department will be the lead investigators in this incident.
And to get the timeline right, like you said, you had your officers, they responded on scene. There was also the Chesterfield officer that discharged their weapon, did not hit the suspect. So I guess, was the suspect already in the act of surrendering to the Chesterfield officer, and I guess Richmond Police took over because of the jurisdiction?
No, it's unclear how that played out. When our officers went inside, they didn't initially see the Chesterfield police officer. They saw the suspect sitting in a chair. Other patients pointed him out as the shooter, and he was taken into custody without any force used by Richmond.
Was the suspect still holding their firearm while sitting in the chair and police arrived?
No, he had thrown the firearm to the ground prior to the officer's arrival.
How did the suspect have a firearm in the hospital? How did that happen?
He must have walked in with it.
And can you walk us through this one more time? You said he was in a hospital room, disrobing when he pulled out the weapon and fired.
Yes. Yes.
Was the patient or the victim, who you said was also a patient, were they in that room with them, or did the shoot were sort of in a hallway or exterior area?
That patient was in the hallway. The shooter was in the room by himself disrobing.
Gotcha. How many shots did they fire?
That's still part of the investigation. I'm unaware of that.
Gotcha. And then just, I don't know if it's a dumb question, but was it like, so he actively shot the other person? This, as you said, disrobing gun fell out, discharge hits the ground, and this was like
It was not accidental.
And you said again that that person, the shooter, was turning themselves in for a mental health situation, or
That's what he was going to be evaluated for.
going to be that by like he was taken there, or
No,
he
no.
went voluntarily?
He responded himself
He
and
brought
just
himself
just showed up himself by a private vehicle. Law enforcement wasn't involved at that time with him.
Typically, are there armed security or armed officers always stationed at this hospital, or was it just pure luck that there were officers here?
Sometimes we have officers who work extra duty. There was not a Richmond police officer working extra duty at this time when this incident occurred. But it was just luck that we had officers there on an unrelated call and they were able to respond rapidly. And it was also lucky that Chesterfield was on scene and was able to engage the suspect so quickly.
And just making sure, just want to make sure I understand this, the Chesterfield officer was not.
His boot was struck. We do not believe it. He did not have any injury, but we believe his boot was struck either by a bullet or maybe a ricochet. But it did not break the skin.
And that would have been from the suspect's firearm rather than the officer who fired? Because you said the Chesterfield officer fired themselves?
Yes, at this point we believe there were only two people shooting, so we believe he was shot by the suspect.
Gotcha.
But that's still under investigation.
And with the hospital having been on lockdown, do you know how this maybe impacted, patients getting treatment, things like that? Were they still able to?
Well, that I know they have a protocol, but I'd have to refer you to HCA on that.
And then again, just without knowing the layout here, just trying to visualize this. If the Chesterfield officer had engaged with the suspect at some point, but then your officers showed up to where the suspect was just sitting there casually, how much time elapsed between the initial shooting, this shooting with the officer, when your officers arrived, and I guess where was that Chesterfield officer in between? If he wasn't there when your officers
Yeah, he wasn't seen by our officers initially, so I don't know exactly where he was. I know that we believe it was our officers' response time was within minutes by the time they got the call. Obviously, there was probably time, because the call came in as a 911 call from Tucker's. So staff there called it. And then it took time to go through our dispatch, so I'm sure that took a minute or two. And then the officers reported that they were familiar with the hospital grounds and responded immediately.
How long was the hospital on lockdown?
I can't answer that. I know that very recently they just announced that they were no longer on lockdown.
Now regarding the suspect, obviously they were admitting themselves for self-evaluation. So, are you keeping them here on a TDO, or have you taken them to jail? What's the status of that?
The suspect a TDO had not been issued. They hadn't even gotten to that point. At this point, because of the serious nature of the crime, we will, after consulting with the Commonwealth attorney, determine the most appropriate charges in this matter. And then but just because you may be in mental health crisis, if you shoot someone, we will still take you to jail, and then they can get the treatment they need in a secure facility. No, not that we know of, and I would be surprised if they knew each other.
So just a random act, essentially.
I can't say that. I can just say that it doesn't appear that they knew each other. And to your point earlier, it wasn't accidental. Multiple shots were fired. It wasn't like he dropped the gun and it went off, if that was your question.
Anything more you can add, Chief, or something we touched on?
No, I think we'll be adding information. We'll be putting on a press release later with charges, the name of the offender, and some more details as we go. But again, this is in the early stages, and we just appreciate the response of the Chesterfield Police and certainly our officers being close by to make sure this wasn't a bigger tragedy than it already is.
Thank you, sir.